Good afternoon. Now the Instagram is cooperating. All right, we are live. All right, welcome to Freedom Deals Live, guys. For those that don't know me, I'm Peter Bowman. And so what we do in these sessions is we go live and I pull apart either potential deal or a deal that I've done in the past or a deal that I'm looking at. So sometimes it might contain confidential information, but obviously given where I'm publicizing this, I probably won't share the confidential parts, or I'll wait until it's not so sensitive anymore. But what we're going to be going through today is a potential subdivision site. It could also be a potential renovation site. And there's also question marks around how many lots could it actually be subdivided into. So there's a few different things we've got to look at here. Zoning, what the current status of the property is, what the current condition of the property is, what is the market looking for in this area? So what kind of product are we going to produce at the end? And ultimately, what can we get for that product? And then we'll go through a feasibility and see if this project is actually something feasible. So spoiler alert, this is a deal that I did miss out on. So I was bidding on this site. And in the end, the vendors wanted a number that I wasn't willing to pay. And you'll soon see why I drew the line in the sand where I drew the line in the sand. And that is a big part of the development journey. So if you're new to this, one of the things that I hope you discover sooner rather than later is that this is prospecting. So you're going to turn away many more properties than you genuinely hunt after. Often the vendors will not be realistic in their prices, or there will be someone that's willing to pay more for something different. There may be an emotional purchaser, maybe they're a builder and they have no interest in making a margin on what you're trying to do. They're just trying to get something to keep their trades busy. So there's all sorts of reasons why people might be willing to pay more for a site than you are willing to pay. The important thing is understanding where your line is based on your strategy, based on based on your expertise and what you know how to do. You need to know where your line in the sand is, because what anyone else is willing to pay for a site is absolutely irrelevant. Now, before I continue, let's just do a quick tech check. Can I just get in the comments that you can hear me and you can see me? I haven't seen any comments saying to the counter to that, so I'm assuming you can, but it would be good to see in the comments. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Just let me know for sure, so that way I can continue on and know that I'm not just talking to myself. It's good to see we've got a few of you on already. Can hear and can see. Thank you very much. Excellent. All right, let's kick off. So now some of you I know have been coming along to these sessions for a while now. I think I started running these sessions maybe 6 weeks ago, something like that. And some of you have been quite regular at it. So first of all, congratulations on that. But now that means I'm actually going to start testing you. So I'm going to start throwing things to you to actually see if you're starting to understand the pattern here as to how we pull these sites apart. What is important? Where are the areas that we focus? And probably, arguably just as important is, where do we focus first? Because there's no point focusing on elements that are way further down the track when there are many other things that are the bigger ticket items that will typically disqualify a site sooner. I'll give you an example. Buying price is a huge one. There's no point finding out and spending all the time to figure out if a development site is functionally fantastic if the vendor's price expectations are completely unrealistic or just way out of the realms of what you can pay for the site based on your strategy. So the order in which we do due diligence is, I would say, equally as important as what we do in due diligence, because one of the things that I see with people starting out, and if we look at the history of people that tried but never did anything or never actually did a development, I would put a pretty strong argument to the fact that the reason they never proceeded was they didn't know how to get through sites fast enough. They didn't know the order in which to do their due diligence. So that led to them spending way too much time doing due diligence on each site, as opposed to someone like myself who can look at a site most sites for a few minutes, if that, and know whether or not I'm going to be putting an offer in or not, and knowing roughly where my offer is going to be. And then I'm not going to spend any more time on it until I discover whether or not the vendor and I are on the same page, or at least in the same realm. Because otherwise you end up with a database full of wonderful spreadsheets and wonderful documents for a whole bunch of sites that you never bought. That being said, let's move on to this one. Okay, so this particular project here, or potential project here, it's an 892 square meter block. You can see here the dimensions. Just confirm for me that you can see this aerial shot that I'm showing for you, please. So you should be able to see a satellite picture, which I'm now moving around, and you can see my cursor going around the boundary at the moment. So again, if you can just pop in the comments that you can see that. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we've got a 20 meter frontage, 20.07, and 44.5 meters deep. Just for those that aren't familiar with the programs, this is Land Checker that I'm using. I'm not specifically advocating it. There are many things out there, many programs out there today that can do a similar thing to what I'm doing now. This just happens to be the one that I use. And most of you that have seen me for a while know that I'm not a huge advocate for the programs that claim to do it all, because often you need to be an expert in order to identify their where they fall short, which is a bit dangerous, in my opinion. So here we are, and we're looking at this from a perspective of whether we subdivide it, whether we renovate it, whether we build something on it. And very important to that, actually, I'm getting you guys to lead me here. What do you think is the first thing we need to look at here? The very first thing we need to look at in the due diligence. So let's focus specifically on the subdivision side of things. Where do we start? What is the first thing we look at? Pause for effect. Slope. Okay. Legal point of discharge. I'm guessing you're getting at there. Can we get the water off the site? So you've been paying attention. Fantastic. I'm actually going to take us a step back further, and that's zoning. So in this particular one here, we are in general residential next generation neighborhood. Now, we're not going to go into a big zoning lesson, but I'll tell you, in this council, in this area, that is their higher density zoning. It's not their highest, but it is a higher density zoning, pardon me, which does allow for things like small lot subdivision, townhouses, duplexes, and a very long list of other things. But for the purposes of what we're looking at, what's most interesting to us there is small lot subdivision. So in this zoning, there's actually no specified minimum lot size, which is very interesting. Now, that doesn't mean you can create a 10 meter block, as in 10 square meters. You do need to be able to identify and show how the block can be functional, a building envelope, and there's a number of other things that you need to show. But it's not uncommon in this zoning for blocks to be created as small as 200 square meters, as an example. Personally, the smallest I've created in this zoning is 215 square meters, but I do know of some that have been created at 180. That's the smallest I've heard to date, but gives you, some, I guess, context as to what is possible in this zoning. So in this one here, next generation, okay, so the idea of splitting this into splitting this into two or splitting this into three is definitely conceivable. Okay, let's look further into it. What possibilities have we got here? We've got an existing dwelling, and let's just look at some possible configurations. Well, one obvious one is the old split down the middle. This is a fairly standard size block, 892 square meters, 20 meter frontage. Typically it's 20 meter frontage and 40 meters deep, which gives you the 800, but this is slightly deeper. So splitting down the middle would seem like a very simple approach and probably fairly foolproof, at least with regards to the zoning. What other possibilities do you see? Given what I've just said now about what's possible in this zoning, how else could we configure this as a subdivision? Let's see if we can get those creative juices flowing. So how else could we configure this block for a subdivision other than just splitting it down the middle as a 1 into 2? Rear lot? Absolutely. In this case here, that is a very interesting proposition because there's an existing house. So if you recall, the ratio that I put out there is that it's typically not worth demolishing a house unless you can get at least an additional 2 lots. That's assuming it's a house that holds some value. We've got 3 lots with a long driveway on the south side. 3 lots. Okay. So basically 2 lots at the front, 1 lot at the rear. Okay. So let's explore those for a second. So in this particular council, what you need for a rear access driveway, strictly by the book, is 5 meters. So let's check that out. Do we have that? Looks like we've got that easily. Now, to just remember, this is obviously rough measurements. You can never rely on this to actually make a decision. You need to survey the site. It's called parallax error. These boundaries can be out by a fairly significant margin. So you want to look where the white line is, but you also want to pay attention to where the physical fence is. Not to say that fences are always in the right location, but you're just trying to narrow it down a bit. But yes, that does look like we have ample space for a rear access driveway. So let's just have a look at what that rear block would be size-wise, roughly. All right, well, obviously we can move that boundary around, but I mean, even a 400 square meter block these days is a very, very functional block, and there's plenty of options there. So if we just said that for a moment and just said that the aim was to create roughly a 400 square meter block at the rear with the rear access driveway, and then potentially either one lot at the front over here or potentially two lots. Now, in theory, in this zoning, an additional two lots at the front is actually doable, theoretically. Why? Because what you've got left, if you've got a 5 meter access handle here, well, we've got 15 meters left at the frontage. 7.5 meter wide blocks is a very well accepted product now in terms of terrace homes. Effectively, people get to build their own townhouse. So the question that I've got here, though, let's have a look how deep that would be. So you've only got 25 meters worth of depth. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm not saying that at all. You probably can get away. I mean, you can definitely, in theory, create the block space from the zoning, but the question is here, what can you build on it? Can you provide evidence to council that there's something built form that you can put on there that's going to work? And in this case here, we're talking freehold title, so it's got to be a house, not a townhouse. With 25 meters, you probably can. I would want to talk with a builder. I'd want to get something drafted to be sure. But you probably can get away with two 7.5 meter wide blocks at the front, which would be roughly 25 meters deep. It's not a lay down misère. It's not something I'm willing to go, yes, definitely we can do that. It's something that would require further due diligence. I would definitely want to get some plans done up to make sure that a dwelling can fit on there and be functional. Remember, just because you can build it doesn't mean you should. Yeah, there is that to consider. Is just because you can build it doesn't necessarily mean you're delivering a good product at the end, which means you're going to have trouble selling it. And something from my own experience, there's a couple of projects I did early on in my career, which I now drive past, and I'm not particularly proud of them. The numbers worked, but now when I look at how they impacted the broader community and what they look like, I'm not so sure about them. So you do need to drive past these things for the rest of your life. So keep that in mind too. So with this one here, I'm going to say yes, 1 into 2, either down the middle or rear access seems like a given, and then potentially the upside of a third lot at the front. Keeping in mind though, the golden rule is that normally it does not pay to demolish a house unless you're creating 2 additional lots. And in this case here, by demolishing that house, we're only creating 1 additional lot, and it's a very small lot. So from my experience, it tells me that it's probably not going to be worthwhile demolishing that house just to get 1 additional small terrace lot. Okay, let's move on with the idea here that it's going to be a rear access property. So we're going to keep the house and we're going to do rear access driveway down to the back. I'm just going to look back at your comments there. So you have 3 lots, block of units. No, this zoning doesn't allow for units. So yeah, it is higher density, but no, they have a different zoning to allow for units, which the next thing there is in this area and other areas like it where the values are still quite low. In theory, you might be able to do units. You're not going to be able to be profitable doing units because the values are not high enough in the area to justify the construction cost. So in this particular council, they actually have quite a lot of areas that are zoned for units, and they did that almost 10 years ago now. I got super excited when they were bringing that zoning out, and I went and optioned up a whole bunch of property thinking that I was going to make my squillions at the very start of my career, optioning up all this stuff that was getting rezoned for units. I did it pretty successfully, except for the fact that at the time I had no idea about construction costs and was still learning about feasibilities. And so I successfully optioned these properties. I put together some pretty decent sites, but the numbers just didn't work because to construct the dwelling was way too expensive based on what the actual end value of those units would be. So that's, just something to keep in mind, is that the highest possible density is not always a good thing. In this council, there are many properties that are zoned with this high density, but they're actually that zoning adds no value to them, because in this current market, it's not feasible to do that development. So really, they are still just getting sold as a normal house. Or if someone has a very long time horizon in their land banking, which obviously does happen, but it's probably doesn't happen as much as people would think. Okay, moving on. So now we go to services. I noticed many of you went to the services first. Well done. So let's see what those answers there. We had slope. Yes. Legal point of discharge. Absolutely. And sewer. Correct. So yes, those are two. Reasons being is they need to flow downhill. You're not allowed to pump them. They're only allowed to do that when you're doing townhouses or where you're doing something with the community title scheme where there are shared assets. So then there is a body corporate to maintain that facility. If you don't have that and you're doing freehold, then typically it always needs to be free flowing, which means it needs to go downhill. So let's have a look at that. Let's look at the slope first. Now I've actually turned on the topography here, and it's the 1 in 5 contours. You've got to go a long way out to even see them. So here's the only contour in the area in that 1 to 5 contour. And now, why is it not showing me the number? Oh, I won't get caught up on that. I can tell you that's a 15-meter contour, which means it's 15 meters above, there we are, 15 meters above sea level. But now notice that there's no other contour line except for over here, which is also the 15-meter contour line. So basically that's telling us, in general, this is a very flat area. Now, there are definitely other programs that I could bring up now to bring up 1 meter contours and that sort of thing. Not going to do it, because you'll see when we look at the aerial, when we look at the street view, it's pretty self-evident that this is quite a flat block with a gentle fall to the street, which is exactly what we want. Now, while we're here, a couple other things I want to have a look at. Do you see any drains? Ah, interesting. There's a drain right there. So the reason I'm looking for, I think that's a drain. It's kind of hard to see in that image, but it looks like it. The reason I'm looking to see if there's a drain is because it tells us if there's stormwater infrastructure in the street, which is quite interesting actually, because the council map that came back from the Dial Before You Dig actually shows that there is no stormwater infrastructure in this street. That's quite curious. That being said, it's not really relevant for us on this particular property because we've got that gentle slope to the street. So our legal point of discharge is taken care of very simply. The water is going to flow to the street, to curb and channel. That's exactly what this outlet is here. It's an old outlet from the house. So basically the storm water from the roof is coming through the pipes and just coming out to the gutter. So stormwater, tick. Let's have a look at sewer. Okay, so this is the property in question here. All right, guys, you've been doing this for a while now. What do you see? Well, most of you, I should say, not all of you. So what do you see? Do you see problems? Do you see solutions? Are we okay? Is it a deal breaker? And just for reference, you've got the key over on the side there. So we're looking at water and sewer on this diagram. So this is from Unity Water, which is the utility provider in this particular council area. So water to the front and sewerage to the rear, correct. Now, for those that have attended every session, you might remember that we've had some encounters recently of trunk mains. So remember looking over here, we've got the light blue, and then we've also got the dark blue for reticulation main. Trunk main is a potential problem. Reticulation main is exactly what we want. So we have a reticulation main right at the front here. That is as good as it gets. So that is what we call plug and play. So there will be an existing connection, which you can see there's a water meter here. So that's where it'll be. And all it means is we're going to have to add one more meter and one more stub, one more connection. So we're literally just plugging into that existing infrastructure. That is perfect. That is as cheap as it gets. Sewer. Okay. Well, What do you think? There's sewer at the back. We know that the block slopes gently to the front. What do you think? Is the sewer in a good location, or have we got a challenge there? What do you think? I'm getting most of my responses here from a couple of people, but I can see that there's more of you on here. So come on, guys, get involved. There are no wrong answers here. Well, I'll help you. That's actually not true. There are some wrong answers in this situation, but they're encouraged. Don't be afraid to put it out there. You're not going to be made fun of if you get this wrong, because if you could get all this right, you wouldn't need to watch this. Sewer looks good. I agree. So the reason I raise that, actually, okay, we've got another one here. We've got disagreement. Excellent. Makes it interesting. Challenge. Can't use the driveway to put sewerage. Can't use the driveway to put sewerage. Okay, I don't quite understand what you mean there, but I think I know what you're getting at. Rachel's saying, will we need a manhole? Very good question. Okay, so let's address one thing at a time. So the reason I asked that, it was a bit of a trick question. So pointing out that the block slopes from the rear to the front, given the size of this block and the likely depth of that sewer, you're still going to be able to get enough fall from either block to actually get into the into the sewer. So in terms of having fall to sewer, I don't see any issues here. Now, number two, would we need a manhole? Possibly. Yep, there is a possibility that we would need a manhole. Now, where this, I guess the other trick here is the sewer is at the back and we need sewer at the front as well. So there is the existing house connection, but anything that runs across the other block. So let's say, for example, we create a block at the front here, bang. All right, so we need sewer for here. Well, you can't just run a property connection from the sewer main back here through what will then be another block and then into here, because you have to, all services for a property need to be fully contained within that property. So that means what we would need to do is extend this sewer main probably along this boundary here, but that's up for contention. So probably extend the sewer here, which means you're more than likely you're going to have a manhole here. Extend the sewer main up here and then have a property connection in the new block there. So it's not just strictly plug and play, but there's definitely a workable solution here. But yes, manholes are expensive. Easements for front property connection, I don't think we can see. Okay. Yes, I just realized I was using my mouse on the other screen. There you go. Now you can see the mouse, I think. Okay, so I'll just show you that again. Make sure that I've got my mouse on the correct screen. So manhole most likely in this rear corner here, running a sewer main extension up here and terminating in the new block where there would be a new connection for this new block of land at the front. Now, yes, that was a good question around easements. 100% yes. There would need to be an easement wherever this sewer is going through this block to service this other block here. Now, in this particular council, from memory, it is a 3-meter easement over the top of sewer, depending on the depth. If it goes super, super deep, it can end up being a 6-meter easement. But in this area here, that is nearly impossible that it would be that deep. So we're going to work on the fact that you're going to lose 3 meters on that fence line. That's not great. So that is it's a bit of a problem, given that this is a relatively small block at the back here. So I would tend to think that it would be less impactful to this rear block if the sewer was brought up on this side here. Still not great. Not going to lie. I don't love it. And then, of course, we look, is there another way to get sewer? Well, I don't see one. There's nothing else in the street. All of these blocks over here are serviced from their rear as well. So it seems that's the solution we're stuck with, which is not an ideal solution, given that it's a smaller block. Can it still work? Yeah, look, it can probably still work. But what you've just got to realize then when you do your feasibility is that the block you're creating is not A grade. It's got this easement, which means it's limiting their ability to build on it. It's limiting their building envelope. And especially on a small block like that at the rear, that's not ideal. So it's not a deal killer, but it's just, you've got to keep that in mind. Okay, so we've addressed water and sewer. Water's great. Sewer's solvable, but with a challenge. All right, what should we be looking at next, guys? What's next? You've got to be ready for these things, guys, now. We don't want long silences on these. So what's next? We've done water. We've done sewer. We've done legal point of discharge. What's most important next? Actually, while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to show you this council one, which I find very interesting because this is normally where you would see the stormwater infrastructure. Given that there's that drain across the road, I fully expect that there's stormwater infrastructure, but not according to this map. So that's interesting. Electrical and NBN. Yeah, so NBN, let's start there. That's typically the easiest. All right, so number 5 here. Yes, the green is the NBN. So NBN is right in front in the footpath. Fantastic. Again, plug and play. Has an existing connection coming in over here. So we're just adding another connection there. So most likely, well, if you did 2 front lots, probably no construction. If you did the rear lot, then yes, you're bringing the services up the driveway. Pardon me. All right, electrical. Well, you might have noticed here, we can see straight away that there is overhead power and it is on our side of the street. So we just have a look at that. Now, what does matter here, oh, actually interesting, hang on, take that back. So no, the electricity is on the other side of the street, and you can see currently they have overhead connections coming across the road. And here they've had to add a property pole for this property over here. Now, interestingly, this property here looks relatively new. And I may even be able to see when it was built. Let's have a look. So you can see they've done a duplex here. They've split the backyard. Well, it's on one title. Okay, so sometimes this will tell me the year built. Year built 2014. Okay, so it's not that new. And that is in the old planning scheme. So that may not be that helpful for us. Just going to go back over time. Let's have a look. All right, it's not as far back as I thought. Okay, this imagery for some reason only goes back to 2016 when it was already constructed. Okay, not as helpful. I was thinking that if that was built in the last few years, that we could look at that as a potential guide as to what Energex is most likely going to make happen in this area. So putting that idea aside, what we'll work on is what the most likely outcome is. Go back to Street View. I'm so curious about this image because in that image there, I'd have to double check this on site because in this image here, to me, it looks like we're looking at overhead on the correct side. Oh, that's why we're looking at the wrong side. I'm looking at the wrong side. Okay, so here we are talking overhead power there. So look, I'd be fairly confident in this area, given that overhead power is completely the norm, that we probably could argue to have overhead power. Now, interestingly, I say that, but where is our existing connection? Yep, existing connection for the house is from this property pole here. So if it's 2 front lots, what I would say is the lot over here. So if we were demolishing it and we were putting a block here and a block here, this existing block would probably just retain its connection there. The new block, that's a bit more of a question. They may allow another property pole. So it'd be a property pole at the front, potentially run off here. And then you've got 2 with overhead power. Not very picturesque. A lot cheaper though. However, when we're looking at the scenario that we are looking at where it's a rear block, 100% the power is going underground. So as soon as you go rear lot, you are involving design by an electrical consultant, electrical engineer. So more than likely, power is going to get taken from this pole and go underground. They may allow the existing house to be kept as it is, but then you're going to have to run power down underground, down the driveway. So either way, there is going to be design here. I'm just looking at the questions here. So is that house a movable house? Let's have a look over here. I don't believe it is. No, you can see it's on slab on ground there. But look, the moving houses, seldom is it worth it. Very seldom is it worth it, especially in areas like this, which are a lower socioeconomic area. And there's obviously not a lot of value in that house, and it's in pretty ordinary shape. So yeah, you're not likely to spend money on that house moving it. Seeing the sewerage issue, could the other lot layout be a better option, front to back? Quite possibly. So this is one where, look, the house isn't a huge amount of value. So I would say it's a market dependent thing as to what is the market seeking most of the time. Like if raw land is fetching a real premium, then you may be better off just demoing it and selling the 2 blocks. There is always a risk mitigation part by keeping the house, because obviously you've got something rentable. So if through the sales process the market really turns and you don't want to sell at those prices for whatever reason, or you can't sell at those prices, then you've got a rentable asset. So that's sort of a strategic decision you've got to make depending on what the market's doing at the time and also what your risk appetite is. But okay, so overhead, if we're going rear lot, it's definitely going to be it's going to be design and construction, which we probably don't have time to do both feasibilities today. But in this case here, given the very limited value that house is offering, it probably would be worth running the feasibility both ways, doing the rear block and keeping the house versus just demolishing it and getting and starting fresh. Because as soon as you add design and construction with electrical, you're already adding, call it 15 grand there. Plus all of your costs of bringing it down the back. You've got the concrete driveway, which you'll see. You've got all the communication and everything else that's got to come down the back. So yeah, in this particular situation, given the limited value that house is adding, it's it's sort of touch and go. Okay, services we've looked at. Let's have a look at a feasibility and just see how we're going for time here. All right, so we're half an hour, so we've got about 10 to 15 minutes left, so we'll see how we go. Maybe we can squeeze out 2 feasos. We'll see. All right, subdivisions, settlement time. Let's just allow a fairly standard settlement time of 3 months. Oops. Lead-in period, so basically that's the time until you actually get on site for construction. So I've allowed 8 months there for the time being. That seems fair for a relatively simple one. And for those of you that know me, for a subdivision, I would never allow less than 18 months, even for a small one. So I'm going to beef that up a little bit. And look, I could logically explain all of those timeframes that were already there and say why it's possible. But just from my experience, I know, and especially if you're just starting out, the likelihood of you getting your first subdivision completed in under 18 months is pretty low, because there's just all those things that you don't know, and you're not going to run it as efficiently as someone that's experienced that knows the next steps ahead. Okay, so we've got 18-month time frame. We've currently got a 20% contingency in there for construction. Let's have a look. Okay, so land purchase price, I'm going to put in there as $650,000 as purchasing the original property. Now, I'm going to go with water first. So water, given that it's just plug and play, is not going to be any more than $5,000. So if you have a look over here, remember the provisions, $5K per additional connection, definitely not going to be any more than $5,000 for, actually, hang on, I lie. For the front block, it's simple. So the existing connection is actually over on the side where the driveway is. So that existing connection would probably be taken down the driveway, and then a new connection would be created plug and play for the front house. So $5,000 for an additional one normally. I'm going to say $10,000 because we've got to take it up to the back. That's maybe overdoing it a bit because water is pretty straightforward, and the materials are pretty minimal, and they're already going to be digging the trenches for everything else. So that might be overshooting it, but we'll say 10. Sewer, that's a hard one to estimate because we know that there is a high likelihood of a manhole. So I would guess that sewer is probably not going to be less than 20. So we'll put that in at 20. And the main cost there is that manhole. That's a substantial structure that you're putting into the ground. So yeah, I would suggest about 20 would be my budget figure there. Stormwater, as we said, to curb and channel, so that's fine. Power and telecoms, so yeah, if we're going rear lot, going to need design, going to need construction. So with that one there, let's look at our provisions there. 2K for communication and power, 2.5 for a property pole. That doesn't really work for a rear lot. That's probably, I can add another provision there in that spreadsheet moving forward. For a rear lot, for power telecom, so this is just for the construction element, I'm going to allow for 10,000. Now, this on this particular site, that's a pretty wide swinging pendulum, because if they allow us to go tack onto that power pole that's already across the road, then the construction element is not that much. But if they made us bring a fresh connection over from the other side of the road, then we're probably talking more like 20 to 30,000. So that's definitely one that needs more investigation with the electrical engineer. So we're not demolishing the house in that one. So this one remains as 0. Erosion sediment control, we've just got a provision. We've got a 20 grand provision in there for the concrete rear access driveway. Earthworks, I'm going to say 0 on this one. And footpath, let's double check that. We didn't have a look at that. Are footpaths a norm? All right, so we do have an existing footpath there. All right, so when we do this, because we're leaving this, we really should, actually, I was going to say we wouldn't be disturbing that. However, if we've got to bring the electricity over, you would hope that it could be run through here, but that may not necessarily be the case. So, and with all the machines and everything, look, I would say it's probably a good likelihood that we should budget for replacing that footpath. The other thing to actually look at too, this gets a bit technical, but what are the current standards? Yep, that's a good tip over here. Have a look at the width of this footpath here. Have a look at the width of this footpath over here. So let's just go down here. So see, this is a newer development. See how wide this footpath is here? I don't believe this one on this side is as wide. It's kind of hard to tell from this, but I'm just pointing out the fun little bits and pieces that you need to consider, because with this being a much older footpath, yeah, that one is definitely wider. So the new standards for footpaths are typically wider than what they used to be. So at the very least, I would suggest that there's going to be a widening of this existing footpath, and potentially us having to replace it because it may get damaged during the development. So we're going to allow for 20 meters of footpath. Okay, I've allowed for $180 per square meter there. That's probably a bit low these days. But what we'll do is, and I think the new standard in that area is a 1.2 meter wide, but I'd have to double check that. But we'll work on that for now. Provisional, we'll say 20 meters by 180 times 1.2 to allow for that 1.2. Oh, that did not work. There we go. So we're allowing roughly $4,000. I've got to say that, yeah, that pricing probably needs updating. I don't think we'd get away with $4,000 for that these days. Seepage pits, nothing required there. Turf, just a provisional amount. Retaining walls, there are 0 because we've got a nice flat block. Fire hydrant, question mark. Do we need a fire hydrant? Guys, when do we need a budget for a fire hydrant? This is a more advanced question. Let's see if any of you recall this one. When would we need to install a fire hydrant? See if there's any tips for us here. Distance from existing hydrant, can't remember though. Yep, exactly. So the rear block needs to be, from memory, it's within 80 meters of the fire hydrant. Now, what I'm looking for is that blue reflector in the middle of the road, which is about the only hope I've got on street view of seeing where the fire hydrant is. It doesn't look like we can see it. It's kind of hard. So look, I'm going to say that a fire hydrant is needed. That's obviously something we can confirm on site. And you can see here, 6K if required on the street site, 28K if required at the rear of the lot. So we're going to be budgeting 28,000 for the fire hydrant. Fencing, let's have a look. So there is an existing fence, color bond down that side. That's great. Look, just for the purposes of this, I'll work on no fencing. That might be something that needs to be readdressed, but for now we'll work on zero fencing. Tree clearing, zero. Initial reno, well, so with that one there, I didn't actually go into the property. I just know it's in fairly poor condition. I was planning on demolishing it. For those that know me, you know my favorite kind of renovation is bulldozer from front to back. So what we'll do for the purposes of this exercise is we're going to say zero reno because we're working on it. Ultimately, it's a subdivision site, and we're going to work on the assumption of what it would sell for just as it is. So actually, look, we'll leave a 10K sales reno budget in there. So that would basically be cleaning it up, maybe a splash of paint. Okay, questions on that before we move on? I'll keep moving on, but I'll keep an eye out for questions if they come through. Okay, so all of this should be remaining fairly standard because we're talking a simple 1 and a 2, which this is set up for. So we've got our stamp duty, we've got our contributions to council, got our surveyor. We do need to allow for the electrical engineer because we will have that design because we're going to the rear lot. Town planner, council DA, plan sealing, pegging survey, engineer, fees for the council and operational works, valuations, titles, insurance, accounting, bookkeeping, traffic report we definitely don't need. I've allowed a $4,000 marketing budget. Disclosure statements we don't need because it's under a 5-lot under a 5-lot project. So interesting one that I came across recently. Now, for most, this will not be relevant now, but just tag it. When you do larger subdivisions, the bioretention or the water retention basin is considered a lot. So normally that never comes up, but it has recently for me in a 5-lot subdivision that I'm doing. And it's very unusual that with 5 lots, we actually had to do a water retention basin. That water retention basin is actually considered a lot in terms of the Land Sales Act. So bit of a trick there. Be mindful of that when you get to those slightly bigger ones. Project management, no. I've allowed for a deal assessment, deal feasibility assessment. Real estate commission, 2.5% plus GST. Legals on sales. Lender's break fee, I'm going to put $5,000 in there to make sure that I've got money allowed for covering my broker and potentially lender's break fee. Okay, we'll come back to sales prices. Interest rate, so we're working on an 80% lend for the purchase, so a standard investment loan, and I've got an interest rate in there of 7%. Probably going to go lower than that these days, but let's just work on 7%. I would suggest if you get to this point in your feasibility and you start trying to massage the interest rate to the very sharpest rate that you can find, probably the feasibility is not robust enough. Okay, so we've got 7% on an 80% lend. I'm not allowing any interest cost on this one at the moment. I'm just assuming that I've got the funds or I've got a joint venture partner who's putting in the cash. Now, sales in that particular area, I would estimate around 410,000. Actually, hang on, sorry. All right, so a 400 square meter block in the area, about 410,000. Now we're creating a rear lot, which is 400 on its own. And then we are creating a house at the front. Don't know why the measurement's not showing up, so I'm going to eyeball it. Of around 360 square meters net of the driveway. So we're going to end up with a 400 square meter block at the back. Now, generally speaking, something a real lot like that, you would typically allow maybe about a 5%, max 10%, probably 5% discount to what a normal normal 400 square meter block with frontage would have. That's just general experience in the market. It's not a universal rule, but it's handy to allow for that. Does depend on the market. If there's an absolute land shortage, which in many cases there is at the moment, you may not actually need that because people are just happy to get land. So look, I'll allow 410,000 for that one. So now there's the question of the house. So we've allowed 10 grand to spruce it up a little bit, nothing major. Now, if the block of land is worth, we've said 410,000 for a 400 square meter block at the rear. This one's going to be 360, so it's slightly smaller, but it does have frontage. So it's a superior block. So just for the sake of our initial feasibility, let's assume it's valued at the same. But then it has a dwelling on it. Not a crash hot dwelling, but it's got a dwelling on it. It is a rentable asset. So even if it is in really poor form, you are selling something that is de-risked. People can put a tenant in that straight away and earn rent, or they can move into it straight away and they've got a dwelling. So it is worth something. Now, how much it's worth, that's subjective. And I could do a whole hour on narrowing down exactly what that number is going to be. If you're interested in that sort of stuff, there is some previous lives that I've done on my YouTube channel, which actually cover that journey. And I actually take you on a journey with one of my students, Michael, and we do a road trip and we go around and actually figure out what the value is for the end product. So look, in this here, I'm going to put a number on it at 500,000. Why 500,000? So from my experience in the past, if there is a house and it's rentable, you're normally talking 100 to 150 grand just of basic value because you've got that asset there. Now, I've only put 90 there. Why? Very ordinary house, very small. It's kind of more like a fancy shed. And just knowing that particular area, I'd be reluctant to place any higher value on it at this point without further research. So again, first run feeso, but let's have a look at what that's looking like now. Oh, horrible. So at those numbers, that is a $70,000 loss on this project. Not great. Now, we don't have time to run through an entirely new feasibility to do the side-by-side side of things. But I think we can assess pretty logically at this buy price, this is not going to work regardless. Because, let's look at the best case scenario and we do two side-by-side lots. And so, let's say that two side-by-side lots are even worth a little bit more. And let's say it's going to 420,000. All right, the realizations are still lower because we don't have the house. Now, have we saved some money up here? We've saved some money, but we've also added some costs. So rear access driveway we're not needing anymore. Power and telecom, probably going to get easier. I'm not going to do a whole new feeso, but the big items that we get rid of is fire hydrant, and we are going to need to add in house demolition. So this is not a perfect run, but I'm just trying to squeeze something in for you before we close down. All right, let's have a look. All right, that improved things ever so. Oh, actually, no, it didn't. It's worse. Loss of 100 grand. So basically, this site here is overpriced in a nutshell. Now, why was I looking at this? I will say, and I will admit that I have an alternate strategy. It's not something that I'll call it a trade secret. I'm not willing to share that one publicly. I do share that one with my one-on-ones, but there was another strategy I was looking at here, which arguably could have made it profitable. Even throwing that in there, I still didn't get it to numbers that I liked. So obviously at this rate, it's losing money on the land, which is not a great position to be in. So you've got to add the value some other way. Okay. Well, guys, we are a bit over time, so I am going to wrap it up. But any final questions? And if you don't have any final questions, what was your number one learning out of today? What was the key thing that you learned from today? just pop it in the comments and let's have a look. But yes, if you do have any other questions, feel free to throw them in now as well. There was definitely some good questions through today, guys. I can already see for those of you that have been turning up each week, the caliber of the questions is improving. Rachel, and I think you were the one that asked about the manhole and the easements. Like already, guys, those are more advanced questions which you would not have been asking 5 or 6 weeks ago. So just for those that have been turning up each week, I guess acknowledge yourself for the transformation you already made over this 5 to 6 week period. Need to look at the site, not just rely on dial before you dig. Yes, 100%, Rachel. Dial before you dig is purely an initial run. You would never, ever make a buying decision on dial before you dig, because even when you look at the more detailed maps, which do exist, they can often be wrong as well. And I'll give you a really good example. Current site of mine, the water was 2 meters in the wrong direction, completely the wrong place. There was a sewer line, which was about 3 meters in the wrong direction. So we built a road. We created a road footprint, started excavating, and hang on, there's a sewer pipe there. Well, sewer pipe's not meant to be there. It's meant to be 3 meters that way. So even with the detailed design, you just accept that as part of development, this is why we have contingencies. These things do happen. But yes, definitely dial before you dig is purely preliminary, just kind of getting a rough idea of it. If the site looks like it's got legs, you get it under contract as soon as you possibly can at the best price and terms you possibly can. Then you go and talk to your engineer and your town planner and you get them to pull it to shred and see what they find. Not only obviously are they the experts in their fields, but they do have access to some information that we don't have access to in public. So yes, very, very good point. Need to look at the site, not just the dial before you dig. Okay. Any other key learnings, guys? Or any other questions? Good teacher. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. No? Okay, no worries. Look, hope that was of value. And if it was, please put it in the comments. That's I really appreciate it. If you haven't, Eleanor, Peter has trade secrets. Well, after doing it as long as I've done it and doing as many deals as I've done, you'd hope that I've got some trade secrets. But yes, you can imagine that I don't exactly publicize those on social media. So yeah, you got to get a little bit closer for me to whisper those ones. So I want to know. Well, look, there is that opportunity. But as I said, I share those things with my one-on-one students, which of course, if you do want to have that chat, absolutely open to it. Reach out to me. But otherwise I'll continue to help you on here. But thanks, guys. That was great. And yes, definitely the quality of the questions is improving. So well done. And I'll see you soon.